Welcome to the Intel Hub News Brief, uncovering the cold hard truth that the corporate media just can't handle. A service of the IntelHub.com. Now, here's Joe Joseph from Freedom Link Radio.
Good evening, everybody. This is the Intel Hub News Brief for 7th of February, 2012. Today I want to talk about the hit piece that was written by the New York Times today against the U.S. Constitution. The title of it is "We the People Loses Appeal with People Around the World." The first problem that anybody should have with this is that who cares if it loses appeal with people around the world? This is our Constitution, the Constitution of these United States. I don't give a crap about South Africa or any other nation in the world. They can write their own constitution the way they want. So anyway, I'm going to go over snippets of this article because it has me enraged. Absolutely enraged. It says, sure, it is a nation's founding document and sacred text, and it's the oldest written national constitution still in force anywhere in the world. But its influence is waning. Why? Why is it possibly waning? Could it be waning because the people have been lulled to sleep under a false sense of security? Or, let's go even further and say, a false threat. You know, folks, we see all over the world today how in Syria or in Libya, they're putting the Muslim Brotherhood in power. Do you know who the Muslim Brotherhood is? If you do your research, you'll come to find out that that's a British intelligence front, that it was created by the MI5 and MI6. And then if you look at Al-Qaeda, you'll come to find out that the CIA created Al-Qaeda. The two biggest terrorist organizations were created by intelligence services and are run by intelligence services. So you have to understand what the real threat is. They rule by fear. And the false enemy that you guys and everybody out there is so afraid of, they're not the terrorists. The terrorists are the ones in Washington, in Alexandria. The ones that are running all this stuff, that are creating all these quote-unquote terrorist attacks and terrorist groups. And it's out of that fear that our Constitution is being trampled. But the article goes on to say, the turn of the 21st century saw the beginning of a steep plunge that continues through the most recent years, for which we have data, to the point that the constitutions of the world's democracy, on average, are less similar to the U.S. Constitution now than they were at the end of World War II. Again, who cares? It says, there are a lot of possible reasons. The United States Constitution is terse and old. Oh, really? And it guarantees relatively few rights. Stop there. Let me tell you something. A piece of paper cannot guarantee anybody any rights. But it does say that our rights, and the Declaration of Independence also says, our rights are endowed by our Creator. That no man, no piece of paper, no one can give you rights or take them away. The term constitutional rights, folks, denotes that the Constitution gives you those rights. The Constitution doesn't give you those rights. The Constitution tells you, hey, look, these are the rights that are endowed by our Creator. It's a reminder. It's not something that's given to you by the Constitution. That would mean that it's a privilege. This is not a privilege. Freedom of speech is not a privilege. Right to bear arms is not a privilege. And what's so hard to understand? And this right will not be infringed. How can you interpret it any other way? It says the commitment of some members of the Supreme Court to interpreting the Constitution according to its original meaning in the 18th century may send the signal that it is of little current use. Really? It's of little current use? Yes. If you try to manipulate things, it is most certainly of little use. And the fact that the people have been negligent in their duties and responsibilities as citizens of these United States allows these Supreme Court justices and these lawmakers to run amok and trample them. Trample the Constitution. To trample our God-given rights. The Constitution wasn't meant to be interpreted. The fact that you have the right to bear arms means you have the right to bear arms. Freedom of speech means you're free to express yourself. If that means you express yourself on a radio broadcast, or you express yourself marching down the streets holding a sign, it doesn't matter. That is your right. It doesn't need to be spelled out. In an interview, Professor Law, who's one of the professors that was analyzing the supposed unpopularity of the Constitution, identified a central reason for the trend: the availability of a newer, sexier, and more powerful operating system in the constitutional marketplace. Nobody wants to copy Windows 3.1, he says. Look it. The Constitution was made by 3 documents. The Iroquois Confederacy, they had a constitution. The Magna Carta, and the Bible. 3 documents. And I will tell you this, folks. You can look at any other document out there, any other constitution, you will not find a better one. Period. End of story. It's broad in the sense that this country was meant to be free, that the people were meant to be free, that the Constitution was merely a guide. That's all it is. It's a guide. But it's built on the concept of freedom, of liberty, and most importantly, of personal responsibility. Something that has been waning. You want to talk about something waning? Let's talk about something waning. Personal responsibility, meaning if I do something, if I cause something, there is an effect. If I do something wrong, there are consequences. If I do something right, there's a benefit. In a television interview during a visit to Egypt last week, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Connie Pinko, scumbag, of the Supreme Court seemed to agree. Quote, "I would not look to the U.S. Constitution if I were drafting a Constitution in the year 2012, she said. She recommended instead the South African Constitution, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, or the European Convention on Human Rights. Stop there. Here you have a sitting justice of the United States Supreme Court and recommends that you should be the South African Constitution? Whatever. How about you do this, Justice Ginsburg? How about you butt out of other countries' sovereignty and let them decide for themselves? The rights guaranteed by the American Constitution are parsimonious by international standards, and they are frozen in amber. As Sanford Levinson wrote in 2006, in our this is his book, in our undemocratic Constitution, you're right, because this isn't a democracy, it's a constitutional republic. The U.S. Constitution is the most difficult to amend of any constitution currently existing in the world today. Absolutely right. Just as the framers intended it. Why? Because it takes 2/3 of both houses of Congress to introduce an amendment. And then you need 75% of the states to ratify it. Folks, this isn't hard. The reason why it was done was because they don't want just simple things, just stupid things being thrown into the Constitution. Again, the foundation of this country is freedom, liberty, and personal responsibility. The article goes on and says, Americans recognize rights not widely protected, including one to a speedy and public trial, and are outliers in prohibiting government establishment of religion. But the Constitution is out of step with the rest of the world in failing to protect, at least in so many words, a right to travel. BS! What's the Fourth Amendment? And the presumption of innocence. The Fifth Amendment? What? An entitlement to food, education, and health care. There is none! What the hell is the problem with this world? I mean, this is absolutely, incredibly insane. I hate to say it, folks. I wish everybody on the face of this planet could get food, could get a proper education, could get health care. But again, that's not the way life works. The way life works is you have to go and work for food or grow your own. You have to educate yourself. Abraham Lincoln was a scumbag. But you know what? He educated himself in a log cabin, reading books. Oh, imagine that. That's crazy. And health care. That is not a right, nor is it an entitlement. It has idiosyncrasies, Only 2% of the world constitutions protect, as the Second Amendment does, a right to bear arms. Idiosyncrasies? The right to bear arms, that's the only thing that has helped us to maintain some level of freedom, but it's not. Folks, ask yourself, seriously, do me a favor. Go ahead and look up the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto. That's Karl Marx. Look up the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto and look and see how many of those planks are currently entrenched in American society. And you'll come to find out that all 10 are firmly in place. All 10! This is not a free country. If we followed the Constitution, it would be free. But, again, people have been lulled to sleep, and now we're in a hell of a mess. Quote, America is in danger. I think of becoming something of a legal backwater, Justice Michael Kirby of the High Court of Australia said in a 2001 interview. He said that he looked instead to India, South Africa, and New Zealand. Again, who cares? It's Australia. Australia, you handle Australia. Let Americans handle the United States. It says the Canadian Charter is both more expansive and less absolute. It guarantees equal rights for women and disabled people, allows affirmative action, and requires that those arrested be informed of their rights. On the other hand, it balances those rights against such reasonable limits as can be demonstrated justifiably in a free and democratic society. Again, we're confusing privilege with rights. Rights come from our Creator. Privileges come from a document, come from a person. Unbelievable. But it gets better. Because the article closes with this, quote, the Bill of Rights of the former evil empire, the Union of the Soviet Socialist Republic, was much better than ours, says Justice Antonin Scalia. We guarantee freedom of speech and of the press. Big deal. They guaranteed freedom of speech, of the press, of street demonstrations and protests, and anyone who got caught trying to suppress criticism of the government will be called to account. Whoa, that is wonderful stuff. Why do you need to spell that out? Freedom of speech is freedom of speech. If you want to shout from the mountaintops, you can. If you want to march in the street and protest, you can. Why do you need it spelled out? Why does it have to be line item A, line item B, line item C? It does not need to be that. The purpose of the Constitution was to remind people of their God-given rights. There's no guarantee. There's no nothing. The only thing that gives the Constitution teeth is the people and the people's want and desire to defend liberty. And if that means that we kick all of these government bureaucrats out on their tuchuses, then so be it. And that brings me to my last thought of the day. And that's with Congressman Paul, who I'm sure all of you know is running for president here for the 2012 elections. And he's finished now, what, third and fourth here in the last couple of states. And all I can tell you is this, folks. If you look at the testimony of Clinton Curtis, you can find that on my YouTube channel, The Freedom Link Radio. You will find that these electronic voting machines were put in place to corrupt the vote. Period. End of story. If they wanted a vote that was clearly fair, then how would you do it with an electronic voting machine? Well, I have your answer. What you would do is you have your console, you press the button, you make your vote. The electronic voting machine prints you out a ticket. That ticket has your vote on it. You then take the ticket and put it in your box, put it in a box as a paper ballot. That way, you have an electronic count and you have a paper count. And if there's a dispute or disparity, then you compare the paper count to the electronic count. And it should tell you what's going on. Do you know why that hasn't been instituted? For the very reason why you have people like Mitt for Brains Romney in first place for this Republican, the Republican primaries, and on the other side you have President Obama. It doesn't matter what kind of flavor it is, it's a poo sandwich any way you eat it.